Multi-hazards, all about protecting communities.
Hi everybody, we're here for the Multi-Hazards podcast again. Here we take a deep dive into issues in emergency management, climate change, adaptation, security, etc. And when all is said and done, our goal is protection, protecting communities. So welcome again, Vin Nelson here, host of this podcast. Today, we have the honor of talking with Eddie Oldfield. He is Senior Lead Projects and Advisory Services at Quest Canada. So the About Us part of Quest's website states that Quest is a national non-government organization that works to accelerate the adoption of efficient and integrated community-scale energy systems in Canada by informing, inspiring, and connecting decision makers. The organization commissions research, communicates best practices, convenes government, utility, and private sector leaders, and works directly with local authorities to implement on-the-ground solutions. Quest recognizes communities that have embraced these principles by referring to them as smart energy communities. So back to Eddie Oldfield here. Since 1998, he has coordinated initiatives focused on local sustainability, greenhouse gas emissions reduction, clean energy and efficiency, transportation/fleets, climate adaptation, and resilience planning. Eddie works to advance more resilient, smart energy communities and is Senior Lead Projects and Advisory Services Quest. In this role, he helps deliver regional and national projects and supports FCM partners. Now, let's just take a quick look at what is FCM. Federation of Canadian Municipalities. So let's go back to and read that sentence again. In this role, Eddie helps deliver regional and national projects and supports FCM partners for climate protection, members in Atlantic Canada. So just for our international listeners, that is the east coast of Canada, where there are several provinces. So Eddie also co-chairs the Open Geospatial Consortium, OGC's Energy and Utilities Working Group, and is a charter member of the OGC Health and Smart Cities Working Groups. He has led development of innovative web-based map services and distributed spatial data infrastructure to support decision-making, including for climate health and cross-border pandemic exercise that was done in 2007. So in the past, he worked as director of the New Brunswick Climate Change Hub. He was a board member of the Canadian Risk and Hazards Network, and he participated in the Resilient Communities Working Group of the National Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction, and that's with the federal government in Canada. So Eddie holds a Bachelor of Arts, 2008, with interdisciplinary honors in sociology, political science, environment science, and technology. So this is from St. Thomas University. He also owns and operates Spatial Quest, that's the name of his company, based in Fredericton, New Brunswick. So he also received Queen Elizabeth II's Diamond Jubilee Medal for efforts to help communities address climate change. And every time, as you may remember, it's my tradition here at the Multi-Hazards Podcast, because I deeply respect the First Nations people on whose land I podcast, here in the suburbs of Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. And because of this, I will say a territorial acknowledgement, and it's from Kwantlen Polytechnic University, KPU, few kilometers from my home. Here we go. We work, study, and live in a region south of the Fraser River, which overlaps with the unceded traditional and ancestral lands of the Kwantlen, Musqueam, Katzie, Semiahmoo, Tsawwassen, Kikite, and Quiquetlam peoples. These are the names of various First Nations groups around me here in Vancouver, here on the west coast of Canada. Now, without further ado, let's get to the interview. Welcome, everybody. This is the Multi Hazards podcast, and today I have a special guest. He's in Atlantic Canada. That's the East Coast, and I am way over on the West Coast. And this is I think it's like at least a 6 or 7 hour plane ride. Sorry, Greta Thunberg, but I'm measuring in plane ride distances, and it's far. So it's like taking a plane from Vancouver, Canada, down to, I don't know, Mexico or something. It's super far, but we're all one country. So welcome, Eddie. It's good to see you. I can call you Eddie.
Yes, please do. And thank you for having me, Vin.
Okay, great. Now, I just want to tell the listeners how I ran into Eddie. It happened, I was taking a course called City Planning and Climate Change at the University of Waterloo, online course. I had partners from the Ontario region. We were a team, and then I don't know why, but we picked St. John, no S, New Brunswick. Remember, everybody, there's no S on that, please. So St. John, New Brunswick, and we did a climate change adaptation plan for that. And me, I used to live in Asia. I came back to Canada. I did a tour of Canada. I went all the way from, I think it was like Victoria, British Columbia, all the way to Quebec City. And I'm so sorry, but I didn't go to the Maritimes. I really wanted to go to Nunavut and the Maritimes, but ran out of money. So yeah, we did this project. And then when I went online, actually, I kept seeing Eddie's name pop up here and there and everywhere about climate change adaptation in the Maritimes. So I linked up with him on LinkedIn, and then I said, would you like to be a guest here on Multi Hazards? So there we go. So Eddie, I know that much of your work over the years has been in connection to climate change adaptation, and then I've seen recently clean energy. So I'm wondering, how did you get into this? I know that's probably a long story, but.
Sure. Great question. I think that everybody has their aha moment when it comes to what they're truly good and passionate about. And I think mine came in around 1998 with the ice storm that hit Quebec and swept part of the East Coast. And at the time, I had not been thinking about this type of career. However, I was organizing a lot of events in the city of Montreal, and we followed that ice storm with an event that brought together many of the types of solution providers, for example, solar energy providers, electric vehicle providers, green businesses of all kinds, along with a large performing artists community and media and a great turnout by citizens. And it was clear to me there was a real demand and an awareness for being able to mitigate against future risks associated with ice storms like this and other kinds of events. And that kind of got the ball rolling for me. So that's how I got started into it. And then I shortly found myself into Ontario and New Brunswick pursuing that line of work.
Right. Well, it sounds like you've been all over Eastern Canada.
Oh, sure I have. And I love it out east. No offense to you Westerners. We have a very beautiful country here and lots of places to have staycations, particularly in the age of COVID, and also to help reduce our footprint. Right.
So you're not like Ontario over there, where I heard about cottages. I'm like, what the heck is a cottage? And they're like, oh, this is these are like a cabin that we have, say, an hour, 2 hours drive from our main city house in Toronto. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, in BC, we just go like 15, 20 minutes across the bridge somewhere, and then there we have it. We don't need to, travel 5 hours away to some cabin in the woods. But do you have that cottage culture over there?
Oh, certainly we do.
Oh, you do?
We have very large coastal kind of communities and folks that either have seasonal properties here who come from out of province, and of course many in province who do. A lot of folks enjoy the outdoor sports and recreational abilities that this place affords.
Okay, wow. So in your bio, I kept seeing this word quest with the big all capital letters, Quest. So I'm just there. You have that connection. What is it?
Sure. We're a national not-for-profit organization. Quest, in fact, is an acronym, I guess, called Quality Urban Energy Systems of Tomorrow. We've adopted the term Quest because it's really not just urban. It's all size communities, rural, villages, towns, cities, and everything in between. And we are focused, and our vision is on creating a nation of smart energy communities that are using energy efficiently, that are harnessing local energy resources, that are integrating conventional energy sources, looking at transportation and other needs to more efficiently meet our needs as citizens. And we do quite a number of things across the country, including at the local level, to help communities along the journey of becoming a smart energy community.
Right. And so what is your precise role with Quest?
I'm a senior lead for projects and advisory services with this organization. In short, that means that I'm involved with delivering a number of projects and services, including research, facilitating working groups, delivering on-the-ground projects with municipalities that focus on either developing their community energy plans and implementing those, or looking at the resilience aspect. So how resilient are they from an energy context to future climate hazards?
Okay, now can I just stop you for a second? There's this word resilience, and I have to admit, a couple of years ago when I started studying emergency management and climate change adaptation, everybody kept saying resilience, resilience, resilience. And I'm like, what the heck is this? You know, you look up online as like, it means like a piece of bamboo or rubber, you kind of bend it and it bends back, it doesn't break. So what exactly is this resilient mean in your context?
That's a great question. I think that there's actually two useful ways to think about resilience. And perhaps the most simple one is, our abilities to bounce back after an extreme event. How well prepared are we? Do we have plans in place to deal with the circumstances we're in, and how do we recover from that? So, and that could include your 72-hour emergency preparedness kit through to other measures. The other useful way to look at this is resilience is more of an all-encompassing term. If you think about emergency management, it really falls within a certain discipline, a range of disciplines. And if you think about climate adaptation, much more on the scientific research and aspects like that. And then you have land use, which is, again, another discipline. But all of those are interrelated because decisions made in one might affect the outcomes in others. So I think resilience is an excellent term to try to tie together these different disciplines in responding to a crisis that unfolds over many decades, as we understand climate change will do.
Right. And I heard that in nursing and in hospitals that it's also a word they use there, like I don't know how they use it even. They say the patient is, a doctor has lots of patients. The patient is resilient. And I'm like, okay, everybody's kind of using this word differently. But as you're saying, it kind of ties everybody together. So.
I think it's a good analogy. I think municipalities, if they were the patient, have to look at what measures they can put in place now to reduce the future risk, the economic impacts, along with the infrastructure impacts, and even the social and psychological impacts on their population of extreme weather events, for example.
Right. Okay. Now, I also read about smart energy communities, and I think a lot of listeners, when they say the word smart, they think about, they're trying to, put Wi-Fi into my refrigerator and into my toaster, and I have this little box, and I buy it from Google or Amazon or whoever the big trillionaire, multi-trillionaire company is, and I'm going to just speak to the little box, and then all of a sudden, my waffles will get made, and my toaster will go off, and whatever. I can just say, hey, I want this song from Justin Bieber, and it'll come on. So people get this idea about smart. So what exactly is smart energy communities? It's like the whole community.
That's actually a fantastic question, because when we talk about smart energy communities, we're not only talking about technology. We are certainly talking about how how a community as a whole can organize itself to understand its energy use and be able to more efficiently use that energy and distribute that energy locally. So SMART involves things like governance, communication, data gathering, policy, and so forth. But it also involves hard things like buildings and vehicles and other energy infrastructure in the community.
Right.
So SMART ties those elements together.
Right. Now, just a question here. Sorry, I don't want to be serial in asking this, but suddenly in the last few years, there's all these cool new terms that everybody's banding about, like resilient, and now you got smart. And is it just kind of a way of repackaging the old thing, or is this actually something new and helpful, something useful for communities?
I certainly think it's useful for communities. We are definitely seeing municipalities taking leadership and moving forward with community energy plans and climate adaptation plans right across this country, and with a lot of support from our respective provincial and federal agencies.
Right.
Yes, so I don't think that the terminology matters as much as what gets implemented on the ground. Although it's important to understand that this terminology represents, I think, principal foundations, disciplinary foundations of what we're talking about. So resilience is something that maybe 20 years ago, that term might not have been understood as well, is becoming more well understood across all sectors in terms of business continuity, in terms of municipal governments having emergency preparedness, and in terms of climate adaptation specialists being able to use research and science to inform decision-making at the local level.
Right. Now, I remember studying about New Brunswick because as a British Columbian on the west side of Canada, I was like, I don't know anything about New Brunswick. I had a friend at Simon Fraser University over here in Burnaby, British Columbia, and he went back to New Brunswick, his hometown, and he became an archaeologist for 2 years, and then he became a software engineer. Think about that. Yeah, that was like 25 years ago. So I didn't really know much about New Brunswick, but as I studied, as I said before, I ran across your name, Eddie, and then you were the director of the New Brunswick Climate Change Hub, and that was very significant. There's a lot of work done there. I wonder if you can tell us what your role was there.
Sure. To start with, I might know the gentleman you're speaking of. Anyway, so
oh, really?
Yes.
Okay.
Back in 2000, I had the opportunity to take what I was working on in Ontario in the Durham region on climate and green energy strategy with the Durham region and apply that in the role of director of the New Brunswick Climate Change Hub. And that position came about because the federal government had a very early stage climate action plan and consultation, and they decided to create these hubs across Canada. Well, what is a hub? And I got asked that question all the time. And it really was about engaging all the different stakeholder groups to, first of all, help coordinate and align what we're doing, but also to communicate to the public and educate the public about climate change, about the science, the impacts, and of course, the programs and resources available over time to municipalities to adapt and mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. And so that role went on for about 12 years, and there were 10 hubs established as part of that process. And as part of that, we learned a lot as a national network of how to work with various levels of government and industry to effect change, positive change for communities and reducing greenhouse gas emissions.
Right. Because as far as I've seen, I look at CBC, which for our international listeners, that's Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. That's the national news website and radio for Canada and TV. But just to say, I would look on CBC and see, wow, there's this storm in Atlantic Canada, or there's this news or that news. And I didn't really know much. But then, for example, we're studying what's the name of that river that's going from, it goes through Fredericton all the way to St. John. It's called the St. John River,
Correct.
right?
Yes.
But that thing is like, it's like every 6 months is flooding. I'm like, wow, like who would live beside that river? It just keeps flooding and flooding. So our team, at Waterloo, we studied about all these storm surges and all these, the infrastructure and residential communities living like right up to the coastline there. And we also did I also did another study on climate analytics. There's I think it's Prince Edward Island, or where was it? Nova Scotia. There's this little island where a First Nations community was just off the coast. And it was like, wow, are they going to actually be able to live there in 10 or 15 years? Because everything's eroding and changing there. So I know that Atlantic Canada, it's really getting battered by the effects of climate change. And what if you can tell us what's the particular situation over there?
Yes. And, in the 20 years that I've lived in New Brunswick and worked with municipalities across Atlantic Canada, I can tell you that the level of awareness and concern among council members, elected officials, among the community at large has grown significantly, and such that many municipalities have experienced now ice storms, hurricane level storms, floods, and so forth. Even more recently, the last 3 years, we've had 2 1 in 100 year floods associated with the St. John River, largely due to snow accumulation and snow melt and weather patterns. And that 1 in 100 year storm, and it's kind of a misleading to most of the general public, it really means that you're rolling that dice every year. You've got a 1 in 100 chance that you're going to get that 1 in 100 year flood, and maybe a 1 in 200 year flood. So and those chances, in fact, increase over time. So by 2050, we'll be rolling the same dice, but we're going to have a 1 in 50 chance of having the same flood every year. So, twice as much. And I think that's a really important concept for people to get.
Right. Actually, honestly, I think probably a lot of people in the public, they don't really get it. There's a 1 in 20 years, 1 in 50 years, 1 in 100 years. I don't know if that actually comes down to people's like radar, because they're thinking, hey, I'm in a flood right now. I don't care if it's every 20, 50 or 100 years. So
no, I think in the here and now, at that point, it's too late to be thinking about what can we do to mitigate the risk. It's how do we respond and recover. And that's fair. And we need to have plans in place at an individual level as well as local and provincial levels. But we also need to be, those of us who are in positions, whether it's in our own work space or community or even profession, that we're taking an active role making decisions to reduce risk going forward, because we know it's not if, it's when, sorry.
Right. So do you have any idea, sorry, I didn't put this in the list of questions, but do you have any idea any changes right now happening over where you are in terms of emergency management and emergency preparedness? Any of your work in climate change adaptation or say clean energy, have you run across emergency managers or city, say the city of Fredericton or St. John? There's some emergency plans. Like if you're having all these storms and all these storm surges from hurricanes, there's got to be people ramping up their response plans and preparation plans.
Yes, absolutely. I guess you could say that right now, New Brunswick itself requires at least 25 municipalities that are identified as high risk to have climate adaptation plans in place. And we've worked with a number of municipalities in provinces across Canada to develop climate risk assessments and resilience plans. So that looks at not only what are the climate impacts and what are the infrastructure improvements we need to make, but what is the impact in terms of emergency planning and response? And we have those participants at the table. So that might include, for example, police, fire, emergency plan coordinator, and so forth at the table, talking about, where they know there are potential, flood risk and how that might affect how they operate in a certain area. And if we show them future flood potential risk and say, now, instead of this neighborhood, now it's these 3 neighborhoods affected, how does that affect your planning? And I think that interaction of knowledge is so important and so valuable. And it's something that even if you work for the same city government, you're operating in such disciplinary silos. Sometimes that knowledge doesn't get cross-integrated and populated.
Right, because I studied emergency management. I looked at what's going on in the US and Canada, but it just seems that climate change is not really taught in the curriculum, and it's not really there. So I'm kind of worried that there's emergency managers all across Canada, and they've got all these, climate change is not like 100% sparking weird weather events, but there is climate change, like can we say input into the magnitude of, say, storms, or the frequency of a lot of things that emergency managers deal with. So anyway, sorry, that's my own thing.
I think with emergency management, it's important to realize they play a very important function in terms of preparing for and being able to help society recover from extreme events, whether it's natural or man-made. However, they are slowly adapting to this new norm of climate change. They are starting to incorporate other risk factors in their all hazards planning, for example. And the responsibility just doesn't end with them. It's important not that, during the major crisis that we're all pointing fingers at the emergency management folks for not having responded effectively. In fact, that responsibility lies on all of us to ensure that we have business continuity and plans in place. We're making the necessary investments at a local level to mitigate risks such as flooding and so forth, right? As an individual level, having that 72-hour preparedness kit so that you're not in a situation where you're calling on emergency resources right in the middle of a crisis, that you have 3 days worth of sustenance at your disposal. But then again, there's the energy component, going back to that. And that's one of the things that Quest is so focused on, is despite all of our best intents and despite all of our best planning, land use, mitigation, so on, if we don't have an energy system that's robust, affordable, but also robust and reliable and has redundancy built into it for critical services at a local level, then we are stuck in the situations like where we have either no power for extended periods or no fuel supply for extended periods in some cases. It might also involve other interruptions to supply of food and goods and so forth. So resilience incorporates not just looking at the here and now, but how do you sustain yourself over time? And how do you recover and become back better? And not just do what you did before, but build back better.
Right. So build back better. I just tell you honestly, my first impression, I heard it at an emergency management conference, and there was a speaker from, I think it was Emergency Management BC, and she kept saying, build back better. And I'm thinking, you've just had a flood, you've just had a huge storm, and I don't know how much your insurance company is going to give you, or if people don't have insurance, they're going to be begging the government for money. And like, how are you going to have the funds and the energy to build back better? Like, what does this word better mean?
It's a great question. Now, in some cases, that might involve improved or enhanced building codes for flood risk mitigation. There are great examples of that in Canada. The insurance industry and through the Insurance Bureau are doing work with the federal government to look at what kind of programs they can offer for flood insurance products. However, those come at a premium for most property owners. And the thing with it is that the government currently is in a sort of a loop where there are not those products being offered. And so everybody then, when they are affected by a flood, have to rely on disaster financial assistance programs. And we're seeing in the trend charts of the insurance industry that certainly there's an increasing trend of cost to the insurance industry from extreme weather events, particularly flooding. That's the new fire in Canada. So one of the things that has been touted, and I'm not entirely sure where we are at in this process, but is that if you are offered a flood insurance product and you decide not to take it, then you will not qualify for disaster financial assistance. And where and when you do qualify for financial assistance, whether at the provincial or federal level, remember that takes time. So in the lurch, you're holding the bag. And secondly, you should be required to build back better, which means either raising your house, moving it back at a setback from a flood zone, or relocating it altogether. And that's not an easy choice for anybody. And it's a very difficult choice for municipalities to even impose on existing homeowners. So there's this whole plethora of issues that come out of trying to mitigate flood risk. And that's only one of several climate impacts that we're talking about over the next 50 years.
Right. So, sorry, I'm a real stickler for language, and when people say better, it's kind of like when you ask somebody, "How was that movie?" They say good, and you're like, "What's good?" The scenery, the story, the characters, the music. What is good? So the word better is like, yeah, what's better? But you're saying in terms of when you're building back better, it's like safer, more secure.
Yes.
If
Yes.
another storm comes, you're not gonna lose as much. And you could also say maybe, I'm not sure, better insured, or you have better plans. So better, it's a whole range of things.
It is, including energy performance, because we're wasting a lot of energy and wasting a lot of dollars, local dollars that could stay in local economies simply by being inefficient with energy. So building codes and energy performance standards for when you rebuild something or when you build something new is very important. And we have a huge existing building stock that also needs to be improved,
Right.
both from a safety and resilience perspective, but also from an energy performance side of things.
Right. And a few minutes ago, actually, this is something that's just dawned on me recently about the difference between relying on oil and natural gas or whatever being piped in from pipelines coming to your house, or you go to the gas station, fill up with your car. But this clean energy, it's local. A lot of times it's produced locally. And I think there's a connection there with smart communities. It's local, so you're not relying on that big cargo ship from Saudi Arabia or some big pipeline coming from Fort McMurray, Alberta, but you're producing your energy locally. So I wonder if you can speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. There are huge economic development opportunities through energy efficiency, as well as just developing distributed energy resources such as wind power or solar arrays for power, or even biomass, or even combined heat and power. There's plenty of renewable resource availability in Canada, no question. But how do we harness that? And remember that every province is slightly different in its legislation around energy because it's a provincial jurisdiction. And so the municipalities are either enabled or hindered in their journey to becoming smart energy communities and truly leveraging the local opportunities that exist in front of them. Energy efficiency aside, I think there's a lot being done there, and I think there's certainly room for improvement. Efficiency Canada had launched its scorecard recently on that. But when it comes to distributed energy resources, it takes a certain set of policies to enable that to happen, whether it's from having municipalities the authority to, in fact, build, own, and operate those types of systems, whether they can even net the revenues and use some of that as dividends towards covering municipal budgets, for example. And in some provinces, that's probably feasible, but it isn't in New Brunswick. And so these kinds of things are hindering municipalities to truly move forward. Other policies that are really important for encouraging renewable energy development in Canada include looking at net metering policies and enhancing those, looking at embedded generation and renewable energy caps and community energy feed-in tariffs, so that you have a system in place that allows these projects to go forward at a competitive, or a comparative rate to the cost of electricity today, because some provinces will only procure the electricity at what they're currently paying. But that all said, you also need oil and gas to supply the current energy needs of our country. And so it's looking at the most efficient way to integrate conventional energy sources in that mix. And some of them work very well in tangent with renewables in terms of meeting demand and curtailing the potential need to create new generation as part of your infrastructure.
Right. So, it takes a few years for everything to switch over. I know that, was it last year, there's a lot of climate activists, and I sympathized with it. They were saying, well, we've got 12 years left because the scientists are saying that this climate change is happening so furiously, so fast, we have to just like go into like a World War II, like militarization, and we just need to change everything suddenly. But if you look at technologies and energy usage over the last few centuries, it takes a long time for people to respond. And well, maybe with COVID-19, we learned how to like get off our butts and move faster. But I'm hoping that, that things can step up the pace.
I think, what Greta Thunberg has done is really mobilize particularly a younger, but also older generations to say this issue is front and foremost on our minds, and call on politicians to do the right thing. But how effective is protest and so forth vis-a-vis having good, effective, and informed policy? And unfortunately, it's not as simple as saying we need to set the bar higher, and either you, local government, we need to see in 4 years that you are going so far, or provincial government, you're going so far, because there are so many components to that. And it's not to say we should put our hands up and say it's hopeless. I think that it just requires a fundamental understanding of how our governance system works in Canada and where our policy challenges are across the provincial jurisdictions. And then being able to bring the necessary stakeholders together and having the public input, critical to this is what they're acceptable to and what they're not acceptable to, but also is what would make sense from an economic perspective. And certainly, if we are successful in this venture, we're going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions as a happy accident.
Right. Sorry, I just want to go back for a second. You were talking about energy efficiency. So that's connected to clean energy, renewables, I'm sure. But what I've seen from energy efficiency, for example, it's kind of like plugging the leaks in your house so that you don't have cold air coming in through your windows, through your doors, etc. And then I saw online that Atlantic Canada, many cities, the infrastructure, the buildings are really old, right? Yes. And aging in some place. I don't know if this is just kind of a West Coast discrimination against the East Coast thing, but I heard that because Atlantic Canada was settled by European settlers a lot earlier. So a lot of the stuff there was built like a long time ago. Yes. So is there really big issues with energy efficiency there and a lot of the old structures there?
I would suggest it's twofold. There's a bit of an infrastructure deficit, as well as a lot of buildings and infrastructure are older than other parts of Canada, including water infrastructure and some of our energy infrastructure. Although investments are being made with certain constraints as provided by the regulator and the government of the day, so that the utility can only really invest so much in mitigation. In fact, if anything, they are limited in what they can bank in order to make investments in infrastructure to properly reduce risk from future ice loading and wind loading on wires, for example. So there are some challenges remaining, but there is a deficit already there. And along with COVID and now municipalities collecting less tax revenue and less other sources of revenue locally, we're all going to be challenged to find ways not to just restore those things, but create a new economic development environment that includes, I think, very critically, a energy efficiency component, not just switching light bulbs, but looking at building envelopes, looking at their heating systems and being able to package all of that for a consumer without increasing their debt load, because nobody's going to be able to foot that bill if they're out of work. And so, but we have such a huge opportunity with the older building stock in particular, that I think it's a great opportunity for this kind of investment, and it creates jobs, and it lowers energy costs for consumers, and it keeps those energy dollars local, which stimulates the local economy. So I think it's a win.
Right, and as COVID. Sorry, this is just my prelude to another question, but COVID is kind of dissipating there because, for example, in BC, we're seeing very few cases. I think there was, for example, on the weekend, 3 days, we had 29 cases and recently no deaths. And it seems kind of weird to say, wow, we have no deaths, as if death is for old people in long-term care homes is normal. It's not normal. It's like... Anyways, sorry, this is my thinking about COVID-19, but is it kind of, are you recovering over there in New Brunswick?
Well, then my own thoughts around pandemics in general, are founded through some experience prior to this. I had done some pandemic work in the early 2000s, and we had done a pandemic simulation with an all of government exercise, basically a 2-day response to a fictional pandemic that would span 12 weeks and look very similar to the one we're currently experiencing. And you know, back then, we knew that there were certain immediate and long-term impacts on the economy, on the availability of resources, and so forth. Fast forward to COVID, and you know, I mean, I think all of us are now living the experience, having to cope with a new reality or plan for a new reality. And some of that involved mitigating the risk, just like we're talking about all this podcast. And some of that involves looking at what is the new normal? What is it? What does it look like, or what should it look like? And what role can we play, either as an organization or, you know, within our communities, to kind of rethink and reshape how we build back our economy, and so that it is either a low carbon economy or a more resilient economy, considering some of the things we do.
Right. So, well, a reason why I was just asking about if you're sort of on the recovery part is because then you can kind of say, okay, like at the beginning of this thing back in March, I was like, wow, you know, all these small businesses, they're going to go bankrupt. People, right? I remember I even stopped my mortgage for a few weeks there. I'm like, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to pay my mortgage. And then after a few weeks, I'm like, what am I doing? They're making more interest off of me. I better get back to paying my mortgage. But it's like, you know, the city of Vancouver, for example, I can't remember, it was like April, and they were like asking BC government, British Columbia government here on the West Coast to give them money. And I was thinking, come on, you know, we can't have all the municipalities just like going bankrupt and begging for money. And who they're begging to? Begging to federal government. What if the federal government goes bankrupt? So anyways, it's just like, hey, this is really hitting the economy hard. But in BC, at least, it looks like it wasn't as bad as we had really originally thought. But it's going to have long-term impacts. You know, if everybody's not paying their property tax, they're not paying their utilities bills, well, hey, municipalities, they're not even going to be thinking about climate change. They're going to be thinking about, how do I make it to 2021?
There was a really excellent RBC article that came out the other day, focusing on the financial hardship that municipalities will be enduring as a result of COVID and post-COVID recovery. And yes, it is a very significant issue, and requires perhaps more investments by other levels of government, transfers, if you wish, on top of what would normally be provided. With that being said, you know, what I was really pleased to see and encouraged by when I surveyed municipalities across Atlantic recently during COVID and asked them, you know, has this stalled your progress on, you know, putting forward the plans and projects we talk about in terms of smart energy communities? And the overwhelming answer is, well, you know, yes, COVID has an impact on business as normal. We, you know, 30% of the workforce is working from home and so on and so forth. And we certainly haven't felt the full economic hardship from it yet, but they are still functioning on basic and essential services. And these projects are critical to their operation because it helps them, improve assets and replace assets when needed and make them more energy efficient, and thus lower energy costs and operational costs to the municipality. So yes, they're still going forward with all these projects. They just can't have necessarily on-site energy efficiency audits and retrofits at this very moment in time.
Right. So you think, Eddie, that municipalities, they're not going to be going, hey, you know, we just need to survive. We don't have any energy to sorry, that wasn't supposed to be a joke there. We don't have enough energy to kind of look at Quest and what you provide for the smart, let me look again here, smart energy communities. You think that you've already kind of built your platform, your infrastructure, you've already got municipalities interested, and that after COVID, there can be some continuation. It won't be like before, but there is going to be some continuation, you're saying?
Yes, without a doubt. And I wouldn't say it's one or the other. I think that it goes hand in hand. This kind of work isn't just about climate change and reducing emissions and mitigating future risks. It's also about local economic development and sustainability. And fundamentally, your plans, if they're going to be approved in council, because remember, their shareholder is the voting public. they're going to want to make sure that they're doing decisions in the best interest of the municipality, including from a tax rate perspective. So everything that is proposed in these plans not only reduces emissions, but addresses local economic needs, from reducing operational costs of the municipality to possibly lowering energy costs across the community at large. And there are funding programs in place and processes in place for to help municipalities get to that point of becoming a smart energy community.
Right. Now, if you could look in a crystal ball, what would you say is going to happen in the next couple of years? Let's just say 2022, 23, 24.
I have a hard time looking at what the next month might hold, given 2020 so far.
I can send you a British Columbia crystal ball.
My crystal ball, I actually don't have one, to be honest with you. I do think that this is definitely the long game, is that we need to become a low carbon economy that is more resilient to the impacts of climate change that are already inert, or that are already in the system, because of greenhouse gases that we've already produced. And so with that kind of reality context, there's a lot of positive opportunities in front of us to be able to address the issues.
Right. And what do you see as some of the most urgent issues that need to be addressed, like right now and in the next couple of years?
From a climate adaptation perspective, I think that importantly, our land use planning policies that are more evidence and science-based in respect to climate hazards. The second would be financing for the kind of infrastructure improvements that need to be made, whether it's energy infrastructure or roads or water systems that need to cope with future climate hazards like flooding. So from an adaptation perspective, I think that's what's really needed. What we are seeing is a little bit different coast to coast, because of course we have different geographies and different climate zones. So the types of impacts that affect us locally and the level of risk that we have embedded in our own municipal built environment are different from community to community. And that's why it's really important to understand, based on the best science available today, what is future climate change going to look like? So what does it look like in 2050 and in 2100? Whether we're talking ice storms, heat waves, flooding scenarios, or other, right? Because that will give you an indicator of how do we build this today to withstand the impacts of 20 years from now and 30 years from now? Because a lot of the things that, go ahead.
No, I was just saying that a lot of people, of course, you put like 2100 on a climate change model, people are yawning and like it's kind of like showing them a science fiction movie. But then you look at, say, 2030 or 2050. Now, especially if you're a young person, like if you're old, you're like, well, whatever, I'm going to be, a piece of dust on the side of the mountain by then, flying in the wind. But if you're a young person, you say, hey, it's 2020, I'm 20 years old. By say 2050, okay, let's get the math going here. Sorry, my brain is slow. By 2050, I'll be 50. Wow, that's like a couple of years younger than me. So 2050, they'll be 50, and they'll still be alive. Hopefully, they'll be healthy. But they've got all this stuff that's going to be happening with climate change. And say a young person say, I really, or a middle-aged person, or maybe even somebody retiring from one career, they say, I want to get involved in the game. I want to be involved in climate change. I don't want to just go out and protest at City Hall on a Friday. Like, I want to do this as a career. I want to get paid for this. So I'm just wondering if you have any advice for people. Sorry, I used to be a career counselor, so very interested. If somebody wants to get involved in this game, actually get paid for it, not just volunteer, do you have any advice?
I want to start by saying, I'm going to answer your question, but I'm going to start by saying that no matter the age, I think that people of any age, including the elders, are very concerned with the issues that confront the current and future generations. And the fact is that even though they may be the least capable to cope with the impacts, and they may be the least capable of, let's say, productively and actively contributing to change, and I say that with a grain of salt, what they are challenged with is the financial capacity to do anything about it. So in particular with energy performance and greenhouse gas reduction, because at that age when you own a property, you're not likely to want to change a heating system or retrofit your home at a debt burden to you. So there's an interesting thing there. So it's not to, it's basically to say they are equally as important as younger generations. With younger generations, I think it's truly important that you remain optimistic despite the challenges and the pressures that exist within this context of dealing with climate change in our current governance and economic situation. That there is definitely a role to volunteer. And when you volunteer or co-op or intern at an organization, A, you get experience, B, you connect with potential employers, whether that's the organization you're working with or other impacts you're making. You have an ability to positively contribute to solutions on the ground immediately. So yes, I think that's a great entry point for some people, this, no matter what level of income and no matter what profession they're pursuing at the end of the day. And I think one of the things I learned was it was very difficult to get into this career thinking about just doing one career path. Let's say I wanted to be an engineer or a planner or even a medical professional. I would only get one set of instructions throughout my education and throughout my career that, yes, I might get really good at, but I may not be fulfilled in terms of addressing the issues that fundamentally concern me. So what I would suggest is an interdisciplinary education. Drawing from different disciplines really allows you to understand issues better. You can transfer skills and knowledge across those disciplines really effectively. I've personally drawn on disciplines such as communications, digital geography and GIS, so I know how to make maps and incorporate knowledge in maps. I've done political science and environmental management studies, and I've pulled together some other things. So ideally, you end up with a situation where you have a number of skill sets and knowledge that you can garner in order to effectively manage a climate adaptation project for a local government. Right. And many municipalities, we work with maybe 400 municipalities across Canada, but there are so many more. There's actually 5,600 municipalities across Canada of all sizes. And so there's plenty of opportunity out there and plenty of need, in fact, from those communities. And they may not be able to afford a full-time position, but they certainly can, in some cases, contract out or find grant money to afford a student or a recent graduate or an early professional to undertake some of the work with them. So plenty of opportunity there.
Okay. Sorry. Because I think it's every person's who studies, their nightmare is thinking that, hey, I'm going to invest whatever, 10, 20, 30, $40,000. And then at the end, I'm going to be twiddling my thumbs at home, applying for jobs on LinkedIn, Indeed.com, whatever. And employers are just going to be like, hey, nice education, but you don't have any experience. So, wow, employers.
The experience is important. It's very important to get.
Right. But the thing is, if you're starting from zero, yeah, of course, these universities, like I'm looking at one right now, the University of Prince Edward Island, Applied Climate Change and Adaptation. So it looks good. I know Waterloo's got a Master's of Climate Change. I know that across Canada, there's different climate change, adaptation, or clean energy programs in different schools. But yeah, you were saying about volunteering. I'm just saying that for somebody who wants to get in the field, it kind of seems like very dark, very bleak, that because you're kind of putting your faith, your trust in employers out there, right? And I know actually you're kind of different. You actually started things on your own, or you found the money. I'm kind of impressed about that.
Right. Yes, I do understand that point. I am a little bit different perhaps than the normal situation. But again, it comes back to, I was passionate about something. I chose to educate myself about that using interdisciplinary knowledge. I pursued funding opportunities that really do exist in Canada. You just have to be able and ready and willing to put the footwork ahead of getting paid in order to get funding in the door for somebody to actually hire you. In some cases, you've got to take the first step.
Right. Okay.
You know,
and it takes a lot of research too, right? To find where are these funding sources, because this is not like, it's not like you can take a course where, hey, here are all the funding sources as of this month. Here you go, apply.
It's almost a full-time job just trying to keep track of
I
them
know.
all.
It's kind of like scholarships, you know. It's like, yeah, there's all these scholarships available. Like, really? How do you find all these funding sources? So, yeah, it's a real skill.
There are some very important ones federally that one should always try to keep track of. You know, every year or every other year, you should at least take stock of, hey, what funding is the federal government putting out there, whether it's through Infrastructure Canada or Natural Resources Canada or Environment Canada or whatever is the programs that they have. You can search online, you can usually find those things or look at them. Provincially as well, it's a little bit different from province to province. But in New Brunswick's case, we have the benefit of collecting bottle deposits, and that is used to fund the New Brunswick Environmental Trust Fund, which funds up to 200 or 300 projects every given year across a number of environmental priorities. And what that is really significant is that the government realizes it can't do everything on its own. It requires collaboration and partnership with community organizations that are better placed to do things like climate adaptation research and work, or mitigation work and so forth. So it's really important for you to do your own research and your own homework, find out what's available, and be ready to take that first step for a potential employer that once you get a grant, you know, you're good to go. You're basically quote unquote employed or subcontracted to do the work.
Right. Well, I like that word passion, because to me, the word passion means it's not like something that's going to last 24 hours and then tomorrow it's like gone and something new replaces it. But passion in this situation, it means it's something that you're going to pursue for years and years and decades. So
absolutely. Well, I never had a doubt about that. 20 something years in, I'm certainly recognizing that there are personal challenges that come with this, like this type of full-time approach to addressing those issues. I'm lucky, I think, but dedicated to being able to make a career out of it. The thing with the personal side of it is you have to remember that burnout is a real thing. It is a subject matter that can be at times very I don't even know what the word is, but I think you get my drift. It can be impactful personally, depending on, you know, your areas of interest. And thirdly, you need to balance your life, just like anybody else in any other profession. You need to make time for your own personal needs, your family, or whatever else. And you have to respect your hours, because it's so easy, if you're passionate about something, to just keep working at it day in and day out, weekend in, weekend out. And that's not a healthy way to live either. And there's plenty of negative news stories out there. And so that's the other thing, is you sometimes have to tune out voluntarily. You already understand what's going on, right? You got the factual knowledge. Why do you need to spend so much time griping over every day the challenges the world faces?
So you got to stay off Twitter, in other words.
Twitter.
It's like, here's your daily dose of poison. Yeah, get your thumb ready. So I'm wondering, Eddie, I think, you know, I'm really sorry. I think I'm making you lose your voice, and don't worry, you'll recover in 2 hours. But what's the one last message that you would like to leave with our listeners?
Well, firstly, I'm very encouraged that this kind of conversation is happening, and that it's drawing together all these different knowledge disciplines, because climate adaptation, resilience, smart energy communities are not a simple matter, and people don't come into their line of work necessarily knowing all the elements involved. And so it's important that you have an open mind, that you continue to be willing to learn, both in your education system as part of your career too. There are plenty of opportunities across Canada to make a positive difference when it comes to reducing greenhouse gas emissions and climate change adaptation. There are lots of not-for-profit organizations that are actively involved in this area across the country. But there are also private consulting and engineering firms. There are utilities, there are municipal governments, there are provincial governments, all of which have positions related to climate change as a whole subject area. And so certainly I think it's a worthwhile career pursuit or education pursuit. And certainly feel free to reach out to us as an organization if you are interested in learning more how to get involved. Yes.
Right. And it just reminds me of a proverb that, if you can't go through the door, try the window. It's in your heart to do something. If you really care about climate change, you really care about clean energy, you care about your community, don't give up. There's a way.
Right. There's a way. Yeah.
And I really love your example. I think you're a great role model for that. So I hope our listeners will take a look at Eddie's webpage. It's Quest. If they want to go on Google, what are the keywords if they want to find your organization?
Yes, certainly. So you would go to www.questcanada.org. So QUEST Canada.org.
Okay. Wow. Great. So much information that's very, very useful, Eddie. I really thank you. And I know you're like 5 hours ahead of us here. You're kind of late afternoon.
About there. four or five, yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much for participating. Really, really appreciate it. And I hope you have a wonderful week and weekend, and that this summer is a wonderful summer for you.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
There we have it, folks. That's my interview with Eddie Oldfield, all the way on the other side of Canada. Thank you, Eddie, for being a guest here at the Multi-Hazards podcast. So a little disclaimer I added to the end of each and every episode these days, and it is, this podcast is meant to be educational and does not try to offer legal, medical, or other specific advice unless otherwise noted. Also, the opinions expressed here do not necessarily reflect those of the organizations that the host, that's me, or guests are part of. So, here as I finish this episode, I thank all of you dear listeners for taking the time to listen to this episode. Stay safe out there and stay tuned for more. This is Vin Nelson wishing you the best on your journey of surviving and thriving with all that life throws at you. Cheers to you all. Peace out.